Today, Defiance and Discipline. Joan of Arc versus Daredevil. Welcome back to Marvel America, the podcast where history meets heroism. In today's episode, we're exploring Joan of Arc, the fearless teenage warrior who led her people to victory against all odds, and Daredevil, the blind lawyer turned vigilante who champions justice with unyielding resolve. While Joan is not an American figure, her story has profoundly inspired some of America's greatest icons. Susan B. Anthony invoked her bravery in the fight for women's suffrage. Theodore Roosevelt admired her courage and duty. MLK found inspiration in her moral conviction, while Mark Twain hailed her as humanity's finest. Clara Barton, Amelia Earhart, and Eleanor Roosevelt all drew strength from her example of breaking barriers and leading with compassion. Joan and Daredevil remind us that defiance, discipline, and moral courage can transform the world. Let's take it back more than 3 centuries before America was founded as a nation. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 in the small village of Domremy, in what is now eastern France. The daughter of peasant farmers, Joan's upbringing was humble, yet her sense of purpose was extraordinary. At the age of 13, she began to experience visions and hear voices, which she attributes to Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret. These voices urged her to take up arms and lead France to victory against the English during the 100 Years' War. Despite her youth and lack of formal training, Joan's determination led her to petition Charles VII, the Dauphin of France. She convinced him of her divine mission, earning his trust and command of an army. Dressed in men's armor, Joan shattered societal expectations, becoming a symbol of hope and defiance. But how exactly did she convince the Dauphin, Charles VII? Before granting her an audience, Charles VII subjected Joan to rigorous questioning by theologians and court officials to ensure her claims were actually credible and not heretical. Her answers reportedly amazed the clergy with their piety and consistency. Joan's leadership was instrumental in the Siege of Orleans from 1428 to 1429. It was a pivotal moment in the war. Her unyielding faith inspired her troops, leading to several victories that ultimately paved the way for Charles to become King of France. During this siege, Joan personally led several assaults, demonstrating both courage and tactical awareness. She was a visible and motivating presence on the battlefield, rallying troops even after being wounded by an arrow during one of the key attacks. By combining bold tactics, inspirational leadership, and an unshakable sense of purpose, Joan of Arc played a decisive role in lifting the siege of Orleans and altering the course of French history. In 1430, Joan was captured by the Burgundian forces allied with the English. She was put on trial for heresy, accused of witchcraft and cross-dressing. Despite her eloquent defense, she was convicted and burned at the stake in 1431, only 19 years old. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Matt Murdock, Daredevil, the man without fear, grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. As a child, Matt was blinded by radioactive chemicals while saving a man from an oncoming truck. Although he lost his sight, the accident heightened his remaining senses to superhuman levels, giving him extraordinary perception. Matt's father, Jack Murdock, was a boxer who instilled in him the importance of discipline and standing up for what's right. Inspired by his father's teachings, Matt becomes a lawyer, using the legal system to fight injustice by day. At night, he donned the mantle of Daredevil, patrolling the streets as a vigilante. Daredevil's enhanced senses allow him to navigate the world with precision, using a radar-like ability to see his surroundings. His mastery of martial arts, acrobatics, and detective skills makes him a formidable opponent, even against superpowered adversaries. Unlike many superheroes, Daredevil grapples with his Catholic faith and the moral implications of his actions. His internal struggle between justice and vengeance adds depth to his character, making him one of Marvel's most relatable heroes. Joan of Arc's unwavering faith gave her the strength to lead armies and challenge authority. However, her conviction also made her a target for political and religious opponents. Let's take a look at her trial. Joan maintained her innocence and steadfastly claimed her divine visions. Her refusal to recant her beliefs, even under the threat of death, demonstrated her remarkable courage. Joan's reliance on divine guidance sometimes led her to overestimate the loyalty and intentions of those around her, ultimately contributing to her capture. In a bold counterattack during the war, Joan of Arc leads her forces defending Compiègne against a siege by the Burgundians. Despite her leadership, the French forces were outnumbered and overpowered by the Burgundians. The French troops were forced to retreat back to the town. However, as Joan and her soldiers retreated, the town gates were closed prematurely to prevent the enemy from entering. This, however, left Joan and several of her men stranded outside the walls. Isolated and surrounded, Joan was pulled off her horse and captured by the Burgundian forces, who recognized her value as a high-profile prisoner. Eventually, she was sold to the English for a substantial sum. The English saw Joan as a threat to their campaign in France and were eager to discredit her divine claims. They burned her at the stake on May 30th, 1431. Fortunately, Joan of Arc's legacy continues to resonate with American figures who strive for justice, equality, and courage in the face of adversity. Her story transcends time and boundaries, offering lessons in leadership and moral convictions for individuals across generations. Daredevil's relentless training and discipline allow him to overcome his blindness and become a symbol for justice. Yet, his dual identity often strains his relationships and mental health. His ability to take on multiple foes despite being outnumbered showcases his mastery of discipline and strategy. His struggle to reconcile his faith with his actions as a vigilante often leads to self-doubt and moments of hesitation. I get that. Self-doubt is always going to creep up. The world is not black and white. There's always the gray area, especially when you're fighting for something you truly believe in and have conviction for. It's going to polarize people. Some are going to disagree with your methods, and you've got to question your methods. Each night when you go to sleep, you got to ask yourself, am I doing the best I can with the power that I have to make a positive change in this world? The way to question whether or not you're doing the right thing is to ask yourself how you feel about yourself when you're alone. It's time to get a global perspective of what was going on in the world during Joan of Arc's era. There was the Polish-Teutonic War from 1431 to 1435. This erupts, signaling the weakening of influence of the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic region. The early stages of the Renaissance were flourishing in Italian city-states with advancements in art, architecture, and humanism. There were groundbreaking works such as the dome of the Florence Cathedral. The Ming Dynasty in China was at the height of its powers under Emperor Xuande. This period saw advancements in Chinese porcelain, trade, and governance. The ruler Shah Rukh consolidated power in Persia and Central Asia, fostering cultural and scientific achievements. Herat, which is in modern-day Afghanistan, became a hub for Persian art and literature. The Ottoman Empire under Sultan Murad expanded its influence in the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire under Sultan Murad expanded its influence in the Balkans, thus moving in on the Byzantine territory. Ethiopia during this time was maintaining their Christian identity while engaging in conflicts with neighboring Muslim states. In the Americas, you had the golden age of the Aztec Empire. Also, the Inca Empire was gradually expanding. The Aztec Empire was in central Mexico, primarily in the Valley of Mexico. Then there was the Inca Empire in the Andes Mountains of South America, primarily in present-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and parts of Chile and Argentina. They were gradually expanding and would rise to prominence in 1438. Under the sponsorship of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese explorers pushed further into the Atlantic and along the African coast. The discovery of the Madeira Islands in 1492 set the stage for later maritime empires. The Indian Ocean continued to be a hub for global trade, connecting East Africa and the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, and China. So what was going on in pop culture during Joan of Arc's era? Well, first, I want to touch on the fact that she has been immortalized in countless works of art, literature, and film. From Mark Twain's personal recollections of Joan of Arc to the 1928 silent film The Passions of Joan of Arc, her story continues to inspire. During the period of Joan of Arc's military campaigns from 1427 to 1431, pop culture in France was primarily centered around the arts, religion, and oral traditions, as these were the primary mediums of cultural expression in the medieval era. Here are the major cultural phenomena and trends in France during this time. You had the flourishing of the chansons de geste. These were long narrative poems that celebrated heroic deeds and chivalry. Stories like the Songs of Roland continued to inspire knights and the nobility, reinforcing themes of loyalty, bravery, and divine intervention. These epic tales were performed by troubadours and minstrels who traveled the countryside and courts, bringing stories of past heroes to life for the audiences. Religious plays and processions were incredibly popular. These dramatized biblical stories or the lives of saints, often performed during feast days. They were typically staged in town squares or church grounds. The Feast of Corpus Christi featured elaborate processions with floats depicting scenes from the Bible, showcasing the community's devotion to Christianity. Gothic art and architecture were at their height in France during this period. The Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris and other significant churches and cathedrals were focal points of civic pride. Religious sculpture, stained glass windows, and illuminated manuscripts were widely produced, serving both devotional and decorative purposes. These works often depicted saints, biblical narratives, and moral lessons. The Book of Hours was a popular devotional book for the literate elite. These richly illustrated books contained prayers and meditations and were considered status symbols. The tradition of courtly love was expressed through songs and poetry performed by troubadours. These works often romanticized unrequited love and chivalric ideals, reflecting the taste of the nobility. Dancing was a popular form of entertainment, especially among the nobility and during village festivals. Common dances included the chorale, a circle dance, and the base dance, a slow and stately court dance. Folklore and legends were an integral part of popular culture. Stories of knights, witches, and miracles were passed down orally and adapted over time. Joan of Arc herself became a figure of legend even during her lifetime, with the tales of her divine guidance spreading rapidly. And of course, we got to talk about fashion. The nobility, of course, indulged in luxurious fabrics such as silk, velvet, and brocade. Headdresses, like the hennin, which was a cone-shaped hat, were becoming fashionable for women. Bright colors, fur linings, and elaborate embroidery were status symbols, reflecting the wealth and tastes of the wearer. While pop culture in 15th century France was deeply entwined with religion, art, and oral traditions, these cultural phenomena provided a sense of identity and unity during tumultuous times. Joan of Arc herself became a pop culture figure of her era, embodying themes of divine intervention and national pride. Time for trivia. You know the drill. I'm going to read the questions first, give you a moment to reflect, and then afterwards I'll read the questions again with the answers to see how you did. Let's do this. At what age did Joan begin her military career? What's Daredevil's real name? Who was the French king Joan helped to crown? What martial art is Daredevil most skilled in? I mentioned his father was a boxer, so boxing was one of them. But what's the other? If you're a comic fan, you might know this. Who trained Daredevil in combat? What unique sign did Joan claim to have received from God to verify her divine mission to Charles VII? I didn't specifically say what it was, but if you know this, that means you know your Joan of Arc history. What is the name of the iconic Daredevil comic book story arc written by Frank Miller, where Daredevil's life is dismantled piece by piece by the Kingpin? Joan of Arc was commander-in-chief of the French army. Which specific piece of armor worn by Joan during battle became legendary and was later used as evidence against her during her trial? When Daredevil was blinded, his other senses were enhanced to superhuman levels. How was he blinded? What unique ability does Daredevil use to see his surroundings, and how does it work? Alright, time for the answers. See how you did. At what age did Joan begin her military career? She was 17. What's Daredevil's real name? Matt Murdock. Who was the French king Joan helped to crown? Charles VII. What martial art is Daredevil most skilled in? I mentioned his father was a boxer, so boxing was one of them. But what's the other? If you're a comic fan, you might know this. It was ninjutsu. Who trained Daredevil in combat? It was Stick. He was a blind sensei and leader of the Chaste, a warrior order in the Marvel Universe. He's trained several martial artists, including Daredevil and Elektra. Stick is known for his rich history in fighting evil and opposing the Hand. What unique sign did Joan claim to have received from God to verify her divine mission to Charles VII? Apparently, she had a vision that was accompanied by voices and a miraculous recovery of Charles VII's secret prayer. What is the name of the iconic Daredevil comic book story arc written by Frank Miller, where Daredevil's life is dismantled piece by the Kingpin? Born Again. Joan of Arc was commander-in-chief of the French army. Which specific piece of armor worn by Joan during battle became legendary and was later used as evidence against her during her trial? It was, of course, her male military armor, cited as a violation of gender norms and used to accuse her of heresy. When Daredevil was blinded, his other senses were enhanced to superhuman levels. How was he blinded? Daredevil was blinded when he was a kid. He was saving an elderly man from being hit by an oncoming truck which carried radioactive chemicals. What unique ability does Daredevil use to see his surroundings, and how does it work? He's got a radar sense, which allows him to perceive the environment around him by interpreting sound waves and vibrations. As always, I want to give you 2 thought-provoking questions to think about. So here you go. If you were Joan, and you knew that your efforts to lead and inspire your country would ultimately lead to your capture and execution, would you still pursue your mission? Why or why not? How about this? If you were Daredevil and discovered that upholding the law as a lawyer sometimes allowed dangerous criminals to walk free, how would you reconcile your moral code with the flaws of the justice system? There you have it. Joan of Arc, Daredevil. Both heroes teach us the value of courage, discipline, and standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Their stories remind us that true strength comes from within, and that defiance, when guided by principles, can lead to transformative change. How can you embody Joan's fearless faith, or Daredevil's disciplined determination in your daily life? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. Tune in next week for another exciting episode of Marvel America, where history meets heroism. I love you.